The following events are based on a true story. Names and details have been altered to protect the identities of those involved, but the horror remains untouched. Watch at your own risk. Story 1. Location: Brooklyn Bridge, New York City, NY. I never pick up passengers without a destination. That's rule number 1 in this city. Too many weirdos, too many stories that don't end well. But that night, something made me break it. Maybe it was the way he stood under that flickering street lamp on Pearl Street, motionless despite the cold. He opened the back door without a word and slid into the seat like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Then, calm and clear, he said, "Take me to where it all began." I glanced at the app, expecting confusion or an error. Instead, a route popped up immediately: Brooklyn Bridge. I didn't remember entering anything. He hadn't touched his phone. He hadn't even moved, just sat there, hands folded, eyes on the rearview mirror. "You know," he started after a long silence, his voice low and steady, "the fall isn't what kills you. It's the moment your body remembers it used to be alive." I thought it was just some poetic nonsense, until he said, "I remember them all, every one of them." At first, I thought he was talking about friends, or maybe he worked in some kind of crisis unit. But then he began to describe them, in detail. A woman in 1962 who wore red heels and whispered apologies to the wind before she climbed over the thing. A teenage boy in 1987 who left his Walkman playing on the sidewalk, Tupac bleeding through the foam headphones. A man in 1923, silent and stiff, who dropped like a stone without a scream. His name was Albert, the passenger said softly, eyes unfocused. I remember the cold metal of the rail, the ache in his knees from walking all night. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles whitening. "You knew these people?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. He smiled faintly, not at me but at something distant. "No," he said. "I was these people." The silence after that felt like it stretched for blocks. Even the city noise outside seemed to fade, like the night itself was leaning in to listen. My gut started twisting, that primal sense that something was off. Not in a way you could explain, but in the way dogs growl at empty corners. I glanced at the rear view again. He hadn't moved. Not an inch. Same posture, same vacant look, like he was replaying a film only he could see. "Sometimes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "they don't even know they're falling. Until it's too late, the air grabs your lungs, your heart forgets how to beat, and then..." He snapped his fingers, sharp and sudden. I flinched. Nothing, just silence, and the sound of water folding over you like a secret. Traffic was light, but I started wishing for red lights, for anything that would slow us down. I didn't want to get to the bridge. I didn't even know why. There was no logic to the dread curling in my stomach. It was like he was dragging it out of me, feeding off it. "You ever notice how the bridge always looks different at night?" he asked. "Like it's older, tired, like it remembers too much." I didn't answer. My mouth was dry. I could hear my own breath in the cabin. Short and shallow. I was maybe 5 blocks away when the temperature in the car dropped. Not just cooler, cold. I reached to adjust the heat, but the dial was already maxed out. My fingers trembled. In the mirror, he hadn't so much as blinked. "There was one more," he said like he hadn't noticed. "She waited until midnight, wrote a note she never mailed. She looked right at the moon before she let go." I felt her lungs fill with river. I remember how it burned. I wanted to pull over, ask him to get out. But my hands wouldn't listen. They stayed glued to the wheel like someone else was driving. We reached the bridge entrance, the towers, looming like sentinels in the fog. The app dinged, announcing the destination had been reached. But he didn't move. He just said, "I came back because someone has to remember. It gets lonely, being the echo of 1,000 endings." I turned to face him, and the seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. There was no sound, no shift in weight, nothing, just gone. I scrambled out of the car, heart racing, checking the sidewalk, the bridge, even under the seat like a damn idiot. But there was no one, no trace he'd ever been there, until I noticed the back seat was soaked. Not just damp, wet, like someone had climbed in dripping from head to toe. and on the seat, barely visible in the dim light, was a folded piece of yellowed paper. It looked ancient, fragile. I unfolded it carefully, the paper cold and slick like it had been pulled from the riverbed minutes ago. The ink had bled in places, but I could still make out the date, October 12th, 1923. The writing was elegant, deliberate. "I am sorry," it began, "but I can't carry the weight anymore. If anyone finds this, please remember me. Don't let the water have the last word." There was no name, just the final line. He told me I wouldn't be alone. I stood there, surrounded by the hum of passing cars and the soft groan of the bridge above the water, holding a letter written by someone who shouldn't know how ride-hailing apps work. I should have thrown it away, reported the whole thing, moved on. But I didn't. I kept driving that night, circling the city with the letter tucked in my glove box, unable to shake the feeling that someone, something, had sat behind me and looked straight into who I really was. It's been 3 weeks. I haven't picked up another passenger since. But last night, around 1:12 a.m., the app pinged. No request, no name, just a blinking pin marked Brooklyn Bridge. I didn't accept the ride. But the car, it started moving on its own. If anyone's reading this, do not pick him up. And if you already did, check your back seat. Just make sure he hasn't left something behind. The following events are based on a true story. Names and details have been altered to protect the identities of those involved. But the horror remains untouched. Watch at your own risk. Story 2. Location: Hollywood Forever Cemetery, Los Angeles, CA. I never pick up passengers after 11 p.m. anymore. Not after what happened last October, when I got a ping from Sunset Boulevard just past midnight. The streets were unusually quiet that night, like the city had paused to hold its breath. I remember checking the rearview mirror 3 times before I even tapped accept. Something felt off, but money was tight, and I told myself not to be paranoid. He was already standing at the curb when I pulled up, tall, too thin, pale like he'd been dusted with flour. His clothes looked like something out of an old movie. Suspenders, scuffed Oxfords, and a bow tie just slightly crooked. He didn't say hi, just slid into the back seat and whispered, "Take me to where it all began." Then he looked out the window like he hadn't seen the city in decades. My phone buzzed. The GPS had already loaded a destination I hadn't typed in, Hollywood Forever Cemetery. At first I thought it might be a prank, some film student method acting for TikTok or whatever. But the further we drove, the stranger it got. He didn't move. He didn't blink much either. Just stared out the window as the lights of Los Angeles blurred past. Then, in this soft, hollow voice, he started reciting something. "Tell me, why must she perish for loving too brightly?" It sounded like an old film line, dramatic but distant, like it didn't belong to him. I reached to turn on the radio just to cut the silence, but before I even touched the dial, he said, "Please, the voices scream too loud when the music plays." That froze me. I glanced at him in the mirror. His eyes weren't on me. They were fixed on something just beyond the window, something I couldn't see. I kept both hands on the wheel after 3. Every traffic light felt like it lasted hours. The GPS kept us on a winding path, but I didn't dare question it. When we finally turned onto Santa Monica Boulevard, the city seemed to dim. Streetlights flickered and the usual glow of storefronts had faded, like we were slipping into some version of LA that had been forgotten. That's when I noticed something else. My phone, usually buzzing with notifications, had gone completely silent. No signal, no battery icon, just the GPS pulsing that single red dot, getting closer and closer to the cemetery gates. I glanced back at him again, and he was smiling now. But it wasn't relief or happiness. It was nostalgic. He whispered, "I used to come here with Clara. We danced where the mausoleums stand now." I didn't know what to say. My fingers were numb on the steering wheel. He tilted his head, almost like he was listening to something just beneath. the sound of the engine. "They're waiting," he said. "They always wait for the encore." We pulled up to the front gate of Hollywood Forever. The iron arch loomed above us like a warning, black against the cloudy sky. I hadn't even realized the gates were open, but the GPS guided me through them like it knew the way by heart. As we rolled down the narrow, cracked path, he leaned forward slightly and said, "Just there, by the angel with the broken wing." I looked to where he was pointing and felt my stomach twist. There was a gravestone with a small photograph set. The face in the photo was his. He didn't react, didn't even look surprised, just said, "I died on a Tuesday. They didn't find me until Friday." My mouth went dry. I tried unlocking the doors, but they wouldn't budge. I hit the controls again, nothing. The engine still hummed, but the car felt like it had sunk into the earth, too heavy to move. He opened his door and stepped out without looking back. I don't know why, but I stayed. Maybe I couldn't move, maybe. Something told me I wasn't allowed to. From the front seat, I watched him walk toward the grave like he was returning home. There was something wrong with the way he moved. Smooth, too fluid, like he wasn't quite touching the ground. So, cemetery was dead silent, not even the usual rustle of palm fronds. I tried the ignition again. The engine roared, but the car didn't move. It was like the wheels were glued to the pavement. My headlights flickered once, and then went out. Completely. Darkness swallowed everything. My heart was hammering so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. Then faintly, from somewhere in the cemetery, I heard it. Music. Old, warbly, like a record left out in the sun too long. A slow piano melody, dreamy and broken. And voices, dozens of them, whispering, giggling, reciting lines like a distorted film reel. One voice rose above the rest, sharp and desperate. "You promised we'd be stars forever." I squeezed my eyes shut. I didn't want to see what was coming next. When I opened my eyes, the sky was beginning to turn a pale gray. The first hint of dawn. The whispers had stopped. The music gone. My headlights flicked back on without warning, and suddenly I could move again. I looked toward the gravestone. He wasn't there. No footprints, no movement. Just that photo of him. Same crooked bow tie, same pale face, staring back at me from 1928. I slammed the gas and tore out of there without looking back. I filed a report with the app. They said no such ride had been registered. No record, no GPS trail. My car works fine now. Doors unlock, engine starts. But every night since then, at exactly 2:13 a.m., my phone lights up with a location pin. Always the same spot, beneath the angel with the broken wing. I haven't gone back. I won't. But sometimes, when I'm driving past sunset late at night, I swear I see him standing at the curb, just waiting for someone else to take him home. The following events are based on a true story. Names and details have been altered to protect the identities of those involved, but the horror remains untouched. Watch at your own risk. Story 3. Location: French Quarter, New Orleans, LA. I've driven for rideshare services in New Orleans for over 7 years, and I thought I'd seen it all. Drunks in full voodoo makeup, tourists trying to summon ghosts, in the back seat, even a guy who offered me beads for a ride during Mardi Gras. But nothing prepared me for the woman I picked up last Tuesday night. She stepped into the car like she had stepped out of time, wearing a gown so intricate and old, it looked like something out of a museum. Her voice was low, deliberate. "Take me to where it all began," she said. No address, no explanation. I was parked just off Royal Street, the chaos of Mardi Gras humming all around. But as soon as she got in, everything seemed to muffle, like I was underwater. I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was looking straight ahead, holding what looked like an antique mirror wrapped in lace. Her lips moved softly, barely a whisper. It took me a second to realize she was speaking French, old French, the kind you only hear in documentaries or read in crumbling texts. I tried to laugh it off. Tourists love their theatrics, but every time we passed an intersection with an old iron cross mounted nearby, my radio clicked on by itself and played voices backward. At first, I thought maybe it was a prank, Someone messing with a Bluetooth signal, maybe a Mardi Gras stunt. But then the temperature in the car dropped. Not a little. I mean frosted windows cold. I looked at the dashboard. AC off, windows up. No explanation. The woman hadn't moved, but I noticed her reflection in the mirror she held wasn't matching her actual movements. She'd tilt her head slightly, but the reflection lagged, or moved the wrong way. I stared too long and nearly ran a red light. We turned onto Dauphine Street, getting closer to the heart of the French Quarter. The houses got older, quieter. Less of the party, more of the past. She began humming, off-key, almost tuneless, but strangely rhythmic, like a lullaby sung under water. I tried speaking up, asking again where exactly she wanted to go, but she didn't answer. She just clutched the mirror tighter and whispered something that sounded like, "Ne me laisse pas ici." Don't leave me here. As we passed Bourbon and St. Anne, the radio flared up again, static, then that awful reversed speech. But this time it wasn't random. I swear I heard my own voice. Not like it was recorded earlier, but like it was answering me in real time. "Do you see her?" It crackled, garbled, and eerie. I slammed my hand against the dash, trying to turn it off, but the controls were frozen. "Behind me," she murmured. Louder now, eyes closed, gripping the mirror like a crucifix. Finally, we reached the address she typed into the app. Or where it should have been. 823 Toulouse Street. I pulled up. Slowly, headlights sweeping across the cracked sidewalk and wrought iron gates. But there was no house. Just an empty lot filled with wild ivy and crumbling stones, like something had been demolished decades ago. I turned to tell her we must have gotten the address wrong, but the back seat was empty. No door had opened, no sound, no shift in weight, just gone. The mirror was still there, resting on the seat with a kind of delicate finality, as if she had placed it there. And next to it, half tucked into the fabric, was a necklace. Thin, gold, elegant, but smeared with something dark and rust-colored. I didn't want to believe it was blood, but the smell hit me fast, coppery, old, and unmistakable. I backed out of the car like it might explode. I must have stood there for 5 full minutes, heart thudding like a drumline. I checked the app again. No ride logged, no passenger name, no trace. Just a faint outline where she had sat, like the upholstery remembered her weight. I wanted to call someone. The cops, a friend, but I couldn't explain any of it. And then behind me the air shifted, like someone was standing inches from my back, breathing slow and steady. I spun around, but no one was there. The lot was empty, silent, heavy with that strange pressure you feel before a storm. But something caught my eye. Just past the weeds and crumbled stone, the outline of a building shimmered, faint, like heat rising off asphalt. For a split second I saw it, a grand, rotting mansion with gas lanterns in the windows and tall doors half open, and standing at the second-floor balcony, her, the woman. Her face was blank, but her mouth moved slowly, mouthing words I couldn't hear. Then she raised the mirror and everything blinked out like a candle. I ran back to my car and slammed. The door shut. The moment I touched the steering wheel, the radio crackled again, soft this time, almost whispering. It said my name, my full name. I don't list it on my Rideshare profile. No one calls me that except my mother. I didn't even hesitate. I floored it, tearing out of there like the city itself had turned against me. But even as I turned onto Rampart, I checked the mirror. I had to. And there, for just a breath of a second, I saw her face in the rear view. Smiling. Not kindly. I didn't go home that night. I drove until sunrise, windows down, music blaring just to drown out the silence. I threw the mirror and the necklace into a dumpster off Magazine Street, but I swear to you, the mirror was warm. Like it had been held too long, like it remembered being touched. I've driven past that empty lot twice since then. Nothing's there. No shimmer, no echo. But sometimes when I stop at red lights late at night, the rear view goes dark for a moment, and when it flickers back, I always check. If you're ever in the French Quarter during Mardi Gras, don't pick up strange riders without a clear destination. don't ignore the chill in the air or the way your radio talks back. And for the love of God, don't look in the mirror too long, because once you've seen her, she doesn't go away. She waits, and maybe one night when you least expect it, she'll ask you for a ride. The following events are based on a true story. Names and details have been altered to protect the identities of those involved, but the horror remains untouched. Watch at your own risk. Story 4. Location: Navy Pier, Chicago, IL. I've been driving for 6 years, and nothing ever really fazed me. Until that night. It was just after 2 a.m., the kind of cold where your breath freezes mid-air, and the city looks like it's holding itself still just to stay warm. I'd been circling near Millennium Park, hoping to catch one last fare before calling it quits. That's when I saw him, standing alone near the fountain, drenched from head to toe like he'd just climbed out of Lake Michigan. No coat, no shiver, just staring at my car like he'd been waiting for it. He slid into the back seat without a word at first, soaking the leather instantly. I flinched when the icy water touched my neck through the gap in my collar. "Take me," he said in a low, calm voice, "to where it all began." I glanced at him in the mirror. His eyes didn't meet mine, but something about them felt distant, like they weren't really seeing me at all. I asked where that was. "Navy Pier," he whispered, before leaning back, eyes fixed on nothing, as if the name itself pulled him somewhere else. At first I figured he was just drunk. Maybe he fell in the lake, maybe it was some twisted prank. But the more I drove, the more that explanation started to fall apart. The temperature inside the car dropped unnaturally fast. My breath fogged up the windshield, even though the defroster was on full blast. I glanced in the rear view again. He was dripping steadily onto the floor, but his clothes didn't look like anything you'd buy today. Dark wool, heavy buttons, and a collar that belonged in a history book. Then he started to talk, not like a conversation, more like remembering out loud. It was July, hot. The deck was crowded. Laughter, music. I was with my brothers. His voice cracked, but he never looked at me. We were supposed to be safe. That's what they said. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. I didn't want to interrupt, didn't want to ask, but something inside me needed to know. "What happened?" I asked, barely above a whisper. He blinked slowly. It tipped, fast, people screaming. Then silence. Cold pulled us down like hands. A thick, salty smell began to fill the cabin. Not the kind you'd expect from a city by the lake, but something deeper, older. It was the unmistakable scent of the ocean, of barnacles and rusted iron, of something left underwater too long. I cracked a window, but the air outside felt warmer than inside the car, and the breeze did nothing to push the smell away. Instead, droplets of water began to form on the inside of the windshield, as if it were raining from within. The man leaned forward then, close enough that I could hear the faint gurgle in his throat when he spoke. "I drowned," he said, so plainly it made my skin crawl. 1915, the Eastland, I was 17. He paused, his breath fogging the space between us. I never found the surface again. I stared at him in the mirror, and for a brief second, I saw his reflection shimmer like a stone dropped in water. I blinked, and he was solid again, soaked and still. By the time we reached Lower Wacker, the entire interior of the car felt humid, like a storm was brewing from the back seat. My fingers stuck slightly to the steering wheel, damp with condensation. The digital clock on the dash flickered erratically, and the radio, though turned off, let out occasional bursts of static like someone whispering underwater. I wanted to ask more, to demand who or what he really was, but my mouth felt dry, my tongue heavy, like the air didn't want sound in. We passed the Chicago River and the scent grew stronger, briny and metallic like blood soaked in seawater. That's when I noticed the windows, not just fogged but weeping. Thin streams of water were trickling down the inside glass, leaving trails like tears. I reached to wipe one away, and my hand came back slick with something colder than ice. "Behind me," the man murmured, almost to himself. I tried to find her, I still can't. Maybe she's still down there. Maybe we all are. I turned onto Grand Avenue, Navy Pier just minutes away. But every block felt longer than the last. The streetlights outside flickered and stretched, as if we were driving through a film reel that kept looping the same frame. My GPS glitched and froze, showing our car floating in the middle of Lake Michigan. I blinked, tapped the screen. Nothing changed. The man hadn't spoken again, but I could hear the soft squish of water under his feet every time the car hit a bump. Then without warning, he started humming. It was a slow, tuneless melody, childlike and broken. I glanced in the mirror again. His mouth wasn't moving. The sound was just there, filling the space, wrapping around me like kelp. I tried to speak, to ask what the song was, but my throat burned with cold. I could feel moisture creeping into my shoes, soaking through the floor mats, rising steadily. The heater had stopped working, or maybe the car no longer recognized the concept of warmth. When we finally reached the entrance to Navy Pier, the lot was empty, blanketed in a thin layer of snow and silence. I pulled over near the edge where the lights from the Ferris wheel cast faint halos on the icy pavement. "We're here," I said, though my voice barely came out. He didn't move at first, just stared through the windshield, his lips parted, slightly eyes wide with something I couldn't name. Then he turned to me slowly, like every motion carried weight from another world. "Thank you," he whispered. "You brought me home." He opened the door and stepped out, barefoot onto the snow, leaving no prints. I watched him walk toward the pier, each step somehow not sinking, just gliding forward as if gravity no longer applied. I leaned forward to see better. And then, he was gone. No silhouette, no sound, no splash, just gone. I sat there frozen, breath shallow, until something pulled me back, the wet. I looked down and felt panic twist my stomach. The seat beneath me was soaked through, water pooling beneath my thighs. The fabric dripped, like I'd driven through a flood. But it hadn't rained. Not a drop. I stepped out of the car and immediately felt the chill wind slice through me. But it wasn't just the cold. It was the absence of him, of sound, of explanation. I opened the back door and stared at the soaked seat. The smell of salt water was stronger now, almost choking. My hands trembled as I touched the fabric, still wet, still dripping. I checked the floor. An inch of water had pooled. There, rippling gently like something had just moved through it. I stood back, heart pounding, trying to make sense of anything at all. I filed a report with my company. Took the car to a detailer the next morning. They asked if I'd driven into the lake. I told them no, they didn't believe me. I wouldn't believe me either. But sometimes when I'm parked near the water at night, I catch the scent again, hear that faint gurgling hum. I always check the mirror now, not for traffic, not for cops. I check to see if someone's sitting there, dripping, silent, waiting to go home. And if you ever drive near Navy Pier after dark, lock your doors, don't pick up anyone wet. And whatever you do, don't ask where it began. The following events are based on a true story. Names and details have been altered to protect the identities of those involved, but the horror remains untouched. Watch at your own risk. Story 5. Location: Fremont Street, Las Vegas, NV. I used to drive for one of those rideshare apps, mostly at night. Vegas is quieter after 2 in the morning if you're not on the strip. That night, though, I picked someone up in a place I never should have been. An old boarded-up casino just off the edge of Fremont. The kind of place where time died. He was already standing there when I pulled in, under a flickering sign that hadn't had power in years. Dressed in a faded suit, skin pale like wax. He smiled too wide and got into the back seat without saying a word. I waited for a destination, but he just whispered, "Take me to where it all began." His voice had a strange echo, like it didn't belong in the car. I hesitated, but something about him felt magnetic. I started driving toward Fremont Street, where the old neons still sputtered like ghosts trying to breathe. He didn't give directions, but somehow I knew exactly where to go. As we drove, I caught glimpses of him in the rearview mirror. He was staring at the ceiling, lips moving silently, like he was praying or remembering something terrible. Then, out of nowhere, he started laughing. Not just a chuckle, full-on, wheezing, stomach-clenching laughter that didn't match the dead silence of the streets outside. "Have you ever heard of the roulette of fate?" he asked between gasps. "They say if you play it and lose, it doesn't just take your money, it takes everything." I tried to laugh it off, play along, but my hands were gripping the steering wheel too tight. "You lose your soul there," he said softly, almost like it hurt him to admit it. "That's what happened to me." I glanced back again. His face looked older now, or maybe just emptier, like something was draining out of him minute by minute. Fremont Street came into view, glowing faintly like a dying memory. The old neon signs blinked at random, even though no one had powered them in years. We rolled slowly down the empty street, and the glow from the signs flickered across his face like a strobe. His eyes didn't blink. "This is where the wheel spun," he murmured, "where I thought I could beat it. Everyone thinks that." The lights above an old casino entrance buzzed to life as we passed, though the building was clearly abandoned. Windows shattered, doors chained shut. My skin prickled. I didn't see any generators, no signs of restoration. Just light. And something else. Movement, maybe, behind the dark glass. He leaned forward suddenly, close to my ear, breath cold and sour. "You feel it, don't you?" he whispered. "Like something's watching us." I didn't answer. I couldn't. The air inside the car had shifted, heavier, like we were being pulled toward something. "Stop here," he said. We were in front of a rusted-out casino entrance. I didn't want to, but my foot hit the brake like it had a mind of its own. He reached into his coat and pulled out an old casino chip, worn down to its edges, and pressed it into my palm. My stomach turned cold. His face was on it. I looked down at the chip again, turning it over in my hand. It was heavier than it should have, been the kind of weight that didn't come from plastic or metal. His face, etched into the surface, was smiling, but not like he was in the car. It was a different smile, teeth too perfect, eyes too hollow. I looked up to ask him what the hell this was, but the back seat was empty. No door sound, no footsteps. He was just gone. And yet the chip in my hand was ice cold. Before I could move, every light on the casino facade flared to life, bathing the street in blinding color. The signs buzzed and hummed, spelling out words I couldn't read, like the letters were shifting just before my eyes. I stared at the front doors, still chained and rusted, but there was music now. A slow, broken jazz tune bleeding out from the cracks in the walls. My chest tightened. This place wasn't just turning on, it was waking up. I should have driven off, thrown the chip out the window, called it a night, forgotten the whole thing. But instead I stepped out of the car. My body moved like it wasn't mine. Each footstep toward the casino echoed too loudly, like the street had emptied itself just for me. I reached the doors. The chains were still there, but hanging. Open now, unlocked. They clinked softly in the wind, inviting me. The smell hit me next. Not rot, not dust. Something sweeter, like old perfume mixed with burned paper. Inside, the lobby was lit in sickly yellow, every bulb flickering at a different rhythm. Slots stood in neat rows, their screens flashing, nonsense symbols. One of them let out a chime as I passed, even though no one had touched it. The floor was sticky. My shoes peeled away with each step like the carpet was bleeding syrup. And in the center of the room, lit by a spotlight that didn't have a source, was a roulette table, the same color as the chip in my hand. There was a man standing behind the table, or at least something shaped like a man. He wore a croupier's vest, but his skin was paper thin, almost translucent, and stretched too tightly over his frame. His smile didn't change as I approached, wide, frozen, wrong. Without a word, he gestured toward the wheel, and my feet obeyed before my brain could protest. I placed the chip on the table, It clinked like metal, but the sound echoed far too long, like it had dropped into a deep well. The wheel spun the moment the chip touched felt. I didn't spin it. He didn't. Either it just moved fast and silent. The ball inside clattered around, each bounce like a nail in my spine. As it slowed, I realized I was holding my breath. The man's eyes never blinked. They didn't even look at the wheel. They were locked on me. The ball landed. 00. The man nodded once, and the lights in the room surged like a dying heartbeat. I turned to leave. That's when I heard the voice again, his voice, whispering from behind my ear. "Now you'll see." I ran. Through the warped lobby, past the whispering machines, out the doors that no longer had chains. The street was empty, but different. The lights above Fremont flickered with unnatural speed, stuttering between colors like they were trying to communicate in a language I wasn't meant to understand. My car was still there, engine running. But when I opened the door, the driver's seat was soaked. Not with water, something thicker, darker. My hands trembled as I got in, still clutching the chip. It burned now. I dropped it to the floor, and it didn't make a sound. The next morning, I checked the news. That casino, demolished 10 years ago. Nothing but rubble and caution tape. But I was there. I know I was. I still have the chip, even though I never brought it inside. It's on my dresser now. Sometimes it moves, not far, just a few inches to the left. Always to the left. And sometimes when I drive at night, I see someone in the back seat in the mirror, smiling. If you're reading this, don't pick up. Strangers near Fremont, especially the ones who say they lost something, because they're not looking to find it. They're looking to give it